See the slideshow? You okay? All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Kathy Scott. I'm a professor at Coastal Carolina University. I serve as the Associate Dean at Coastal. My responsibilities are assessment and accreditation. So I am the lead writer on every single SPA report that we do, our CAPE reports, Title II, all of those good things. I've been at Coastal for 12 years. I also work as faculty in the elementary education program. Judy, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Judith Colazzo. I'm over at USC Aiken. I'm the accreditation coordinator and the elementary program chair. So I've gone through, I'm in my 6th year, so I've taken our program through a full CAPE review, full cycle, no AFIs, no stipulations. I have been the lead or co-author on 9 different reports that we're in the process of submitting for our next cycle. I'm also on the PRC committee so I'm serving today as that kind of just support from the PRC committee for the state.
Great, thanks so much. So we have an hour, which isn't like a crazy amount of time, but hopefully it will be enough time to kind of get through some of the pieces that were discussed in the last session and then address it from an elementary ed perspective and of course answer any questions that you have. So I kind of made like a little agenda to keep myself on track. So just again, as they shared in the last session, Jessica and Beth, there is a template that is provided by the Department of Education for programs submitting to the state review. I'm going to share an example from Coastal of our elementary ed cover page, but some things that you want to think about when you're kind of setting the scene for the program. I added some helpful guiding questions. So institutional policies, right? What do students need to do to get into the elementary program? What do they need to do to go into internship? What do they do to complete it? I don't know if someone wants to mute.
I was just gonna get the kitchen from my friend's baby. Oh my gosh.
We can hear a conversation about kitchens. There we go. Okay, I hit a button on accident. Let me switch back real quick. Sorry, y'all, that threw me off. So one of the things that we have to show you is the cover. All right, here we go. So when you submit your template to the Department of Ed, you're going to, of course, fill out the first piece will be about the program itself. And as they pointed out, there's a whole section on the context. So this is your institutional policies. So basically what we actually do is we generally just use our program description from the university catalog and then our guidelines from the state to write what that context looks like. This is linked in the PowerPoint that I put in the chat. You are welcome to use what we've done at Coastal as an example if you would like. If you don't like it, you don't have to use it, but you know, we are here to support one another. And so what we kind of went through just generally was here are the things that folks have to do as a result of ADEPT and as a result of Read to Succeed. Here is some information about state requirements for entrance to the program, right? They have to have 45 hours of college level work. The GPA has got to be a 2.75. They have to have 100 hours of field experience and so on. And then what we did is we went into the field experience pieces. So talking about the names of the field experiences, how they include those diverse field experience for students. So we have both schools of high SES and low SES. We have schools with more racial and ethnic diversity than other schools might have, just so our students can see what all of those placements look like. And then again, we have a little comment here about what it looks like to be a university supervisor. Beth brought up that programs like NCTM are really particular. we do know for state assurances that we have to be particular with all of our programs in terms of who's doing supervision. So we've included some information on that too. All right. And then again, you're going to describe your field experiences. And then here's your criteria for admission and completion. So again, this came right out of our university catalog. You probably have this on a sheet that you give your pre-professional students. It works to just use that information and transfer it over here. And then you also know your messaging is consistent throughout, not only what you're telling CAPE, but what you're also telling the state and what you're telling your students. So you've got kind of that quality check for yourself. So let me go back to our slides. Okay, so again, we covered that. So then what you have to think about is what are the right assessments for your program? And so what I did is I went through like what we have used for programs. I've also served as an external reviewer for the Department of Ed, looking at new programs that are submitted. So also thinking about some of the pieces that we see them using as evidence for elementary education and how they might be helpful for you. So assessment 1 is your content knowledge. That's going to be your praxis exam. And of course, we have 2 options in South Carolina for elementary. I'm going to show you what that looks like when we submit it. For assessment 2, we do use a content knowledge piece. Assessment 3 is, again, that long-term planning. One thing that we've done at Coastal, not just with elementary, but with early childhood, middle level, and our other programs, is we actually break the teacher work sample up into sections because it is so big, it sometimes can cover more than one assessment. So we submit the first 3 pieces as our planning, or we can submit the last 2 pieces as our evidence of student learning. And so you may find that that is an option that works for you. For instruction, we use an internship summative evaluation. As Beth pointed out, sometimes the 4.0 rubric by itself doesn't work. I will give you some suggestions for that. We use an addendum that was modified based on one that our colleagues at Furman actually had developed. It was a great model, so we asked if we could use it. And then we use a couple of additional assessments. We do a child interaction and math methods, so we use that for our assessment 6. But some other things maybe you have students doing, we do a literacy case study. Our early childhood does a developmental observation. And of course, principles of learning and teaching might be an appropriate additional assessment for you to use in elementary. Are there any questions on that so far? Since I can't see you. Okay, so generally speaking, your assessments should cover more than one standard. More data points means better triangulation of your data. You can build a more compelling argument for how you're meeting those SCEE standards. The flip side of that is, again, it should be depth over breadth. So we wouldn't expect an assessment to hit every single standard. That's way too much. And as Beth pointed out, tagging everything will bog people down and make it harder to read. Your goal is to make this as streamlined and as stress-free for your reviewers. I like to pretend they're all like reviewer 2. It's like, what can I do to make reviewer 2 happy?
We
Okay.
do have a question about how do you document standard 6? And I'm sure you're getting to that, but it's particularly the family school collaboration piece of standard 6.
Yep. So in our program, we use an addendum to the teacher work sample. And so our students have to develop a unit for if you're familiar with teacher work sample, they develop a unit, they collect student data, they then have to analyze that data and identify areas of professional development. In our addendum, they then have to develop enrichment opportunities for the student that involve the parents and the community. And so they're doing things like writing a letter to the families explaining this is how your child did. These are areas of strength, areas for further growth. They develop some activities that involve family members or community members, and they kind of make like a mock presentation, basically. You know, here's how community would come in and help with this. And so that is one of the pieces that we use for that part. We also have questions in our addendum for the internship summative that support Standard 6. So talking about the ways that they are working in their internship to engage with those stakeholders in public schools. Okay. So we just submitted we submitted all of our reports. We're getting ready for our next CAPE accreditation cycle. So all of ours actually went in September. This is what we used for elementary ed. And so you can see this is the table that they shared in our last session. We've identified what we're using. We've identified the form and then when it takes place. And so I like to be super paranoid and identify the semester and the class. And then if it's not clear, like when that semester happens, so you'll see like on the last one, I've got senior 1, which is the one prior to internship. This is the course where it happens, just so there are no questions. For elementary ed, one of the tricky pieces for us is we actually use a lesson plan portfolio for our assessment 3, and this happens across 3 different courses. So we can talk through like what that looks like as a submission, because you can imagine with 3 different projects, it can get a little bit bulky or messy, but there are some strategies around how to make that work. Okay, so writing your assessment descriptions, be concise, super concise. You want to tell when it occurs, and then the required score is also helpful. This is what we submitted for the Praxis. All right, students have to earn a qualifying score. This is what it measures. This is what it covers. We don't set the qualifying scores, the state does. Okay, and so that was it. I'll show you some more examples too. For the child interaction, this was what we submitted for this one. So again, it just gives a brief description. It tells what the students must earn. If you've already thought about the rubrics that you're doing for these assessments with your students, hopefully you have a description at the top of those rubrics that you can just take and copy and paste in here. Because again, CAPE expects across EPP-wide assessments that you've got a description and a required score. We make sure we do that on every assessment across the college so that we are using the same format no matter what. It's good for faculty because it helps learn a system and figure out how things work. It's also good for students so that they know what to expect when they get assessments. Okay. The next thing that you have to do is we have to, of course, do the standards alignment. So the SCEE standards, if you have looked at those, I do have them linked at the bottom of the PowerPoint. They are developed based on the ACEI standards. South Carolina adopted them in 2019. They have 2 differences. There are some additional content standards. So there's actually standard 2.1, which relates to South Carolina standards. And then 2.9 is about computer science education. And so those are some variations from ACEI that we have not seen previously. What we do for ours is we use a couple of methods. And so depending on what your assessment looks like, the table and how you represent that standards alignment might differ. So again, 1 SCEE standard per line in your rubrics is going to be important. This example comes from our assessment 2, which is the content knowledge standard. And what we have done is we have gone through the 4-year course of study, and we have identified the specific courses that our students take that align with each of those SCEE content standards. So 2.1, 2.2, all the way down to 2.9. We give the course prefix. We will also indicate if it's a methods course versus a content course. So EDEC 270 is teaching them how to teach it. EXSS 122 is straight content. We wanted to be really transparent that not only are they learning the content, they're actually learning pedagogical methods that relate specifically to that content. In some programs, we also will highlight if a course is required versus optional. So there are classes our students have to take where they don't have a choice. So this is what it looks like for your content analysis. Now, obviously, we don't have a content analysis for every assessment that we're doing. We often use rubrics. And so this is what we did for a rubric. So we've identified the standard on the left, right? We have the rubric line that aligns to that specific standard, and then we've given just a brief rationale for why it fits. Nothing crazy, okay? But what you'll notice is rubric item 1 is the only one that aligns to standard 2.1. Rubric item 2 is the only one that aligns to 2.5. Rubric items 3, 5, and 6 all align to 3.1. We tried to be strategic about making sure there wasn't a duplication of standards. That is something that CAPE has not liked that we've done in the past, so we worked pretty hard to fix it. And then here's just another example for you. And this one goes for the Praxis exam. So this is your number 1, okay? What we did is we took the test. We put the content. I just took these straight off of the Praxis website. I identified the South Carolina standard that it linked to, and then the required score. So I didn't come up with the percents, just pulled it from Praxis. Now, once you have your standards aligned and you've thought about what assessments you're using, it's of course time to analyze your evidence. One of the tips I can just give you is use a consistent format across all of your documents. The more consistent it is, the easier it is for the reader to get into the flow of looking through things. When there's a sudden change, it can cause maybe some confusion or people to stop. I pulled this one because I wanted to show you a couple of things. So this is for the Praxis. The template that South Carolina provides asks for a national pass rate, and they may have updated it because I did notify Jackie and say we can't do a national pass rate. The reason we can't do a national pass rate for the elementary Praxis is because not all states, number 1, require the same test, and number 2, not all states have the same cutoff. So that data doesn't give you a full picture. So all I did was I took the national pass rate column off of their data chart and I just made a note, okay? The other thing we can't show in elementary ed is we can't show an overall pass rate for a test because our students can mix and match. And so again, I made a note here, because students can mix and match subtests, and overall pass rate cannot be provided. Only subtest pass rates can be provided. It is safe to assume that members of the PRC know this, but again, just having that reminder when they're knee-deep and looking at lots of reports can be helpful. You also, if you haven't looked yet, assuming you have access to ETS, to your pass rate information, the state pass rates for the Praxis exam are all located on ETS's website. So that's where I get our data from. Okay. This is just another example of the narrative that goes with the charts. I brought this one to show you because I wanted to show you what happens when you are missing some data. I know that was a question. One of the things that I think is really important to notice is you'll see I've got, in spring 22, the number of candidates, the name of the assessment again, and then their overall mean score. All right. But then what's important is identifying areas of strength, but linking them back to those standards pieces. So identifying student characteristics and abilities links to SCEE 1.1, and then that mean score. Okay. So throughout, when you do your data analysis, link it back to those standards. All right. For fall of 22, we made a little asterisk to say, hey, like there are 2 sets of data here. We want to be clear that we had some scheduling challenges, and so we actually had to merge 2 sections of a course. So we had the students who would take it in fall 22 and then spring 23 in one section. So we just made a note so they wouldn't wonder where data was. Okay. You have any questions on analyzing evidence so far? My goal at the end is I'll pull up like one full assessment for you and we can like look through it in its entirety rather than just looking at little pieces, because I feel like that might be helpful. Okay. And then what you have to do is you have to interpret the data. Sometimes this feels a little bit redundant. It doesn't have to be super, super long. But for this example, you can see I said overall candidates, even those earning a 1 or 2, earned the required mean score of 3.0 or higher. We just demonstrated proficiency or exemplary understandings of these standards. And then what I did is I explained, again, how that assessment addressed those standards. And finally, I also explained if a student earned a 1 or 2, here's what happened to help move them along, right? You've already analyzed all the data, so you don't really need to give them any data points in here. You're again making that compelling case for how the rubric met the assessment, how you know the students met it, and where you're going to go from there. And if they don't meet it, they don't meet it. Like, we just own it, right? So one of our issues has been with one of the Praxis exams, we have pretty low pass rates on particularly I think it was the reading and the social studies methods section, right? Our pass rate was somewhere around a 60% for the first time versus an 80%. And we were like, we fully realize that they are not meeting the requirements, but here are the steps we're taking and here are the goals we've set for ourselves. So just be honest, right? We're all about continuous improvement.
And that's what these reports are all about, for sure. The
Absolutely.
continuous improvement. There is a question about whether to use both the Praxis 2 content and the PLT. Do you include both of those in your?
So it's interesting. We only include Praxis 2 for assessment number 1. I think you could include PLT as an additional assessment. I think there is some flexibility there. I think you certainly could put both of them in number 1. My concern is just making sure that the reader doesn't get bogged down in deciphering the different types of tests. To me, the Praxis 2 and the PLT just address a different nature of activities. And PLT doesn't really cover content knowledge as much as it covers assessment and pedagogical knowledge. So for us, that would be a 7 or 8. Now I can tell you middle level, we did that and they were like, put them both in 1. So, but Jack or Judy, what do you think?
We've done both depending on the program, if they're a more content heavy program, I'm looking at different programs, but for the elementary, we are submitting both. But you have to be very concise and disaggregate. I misread the question, so I apologize. It was more about, do we include both Praxis 2 tests? Now, remember, there were 2. Now there's a new one that came in, another one that's fallen off. So some of us are going to be, there's one that's just introduced in 2023, I believe, for Praxis 2 for elementary. And so the question was, both the 5,000 and the 7,000, do we include both of those? I did with my submission, because some of the students took, with ours, some students took the 500, the 5,000 numbered, and some others were the 7,000.
Yeah, so we did the same thing too. I was looking to see when I close out this presentation, I'll open up our template for that one so that you can see what it looks like. But we just made 2 separate tables, one for 5001 and one for the 7,000 or 711. I can't even remember the number, but yes, we did 2 separate ones. So that's a good question. The other thing I will tell you that we did, and this was, I asked Jackie at the time and James when he was there, was our assessment 3 for planning. I showed you it was a lesson portfolio. I actually used the template provided and I did each one of these as its own individual entry. So this one was EDEL 481, Teaching Elementary Mathematics. This was Lesson Plan Portfolio 3A. The next one was 3B, and the last one was 3C. And then I put them all together as one document, but I didn't try to explain standards alignment or rubrics all clumped together. I felt like parsing them out one at a time was going to make it easier for the reviewer to read it. So I think that is something to think about too. If you're doing an assessment across multiple courses, the state does not have an issue with you using the template multiple times. You just have to make note in the title. how they're clustered. All right, let me go back down to where we were. Okay. So for the next piece, you have to provide a summary, right? How many students graduated? When did faculty review the data? What's going to come? I used to have this, there was a faculty member, I remember when I was getting my doctorate, and he would say like, tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And basically that's what you're going to do, right? So for the assessment results, you'll see we've noted over the last 2 years, 62 students have completed the program. We use a variety of assessments to measure the 3 categories. Analysis of the data says we've met the criteria, and then we give a general list of those assessments again. We make note that we're using Anthology to collect our data. When we meet to talk about it, and then here's where we're going to go next. So you'll see the following is just an analysis of the assessment results across the content assessments, professional knowledge, skills, and dispositions, and the effects on student learning. So again, we're just kind of recapping where we've been so far and where we're about to head. Okay. When you do this section, again, remind the committee of what assessments you used to evaluate content knowledge or to evaluate pedagogical knowledge, impact on student learning. Share those areas of strength, remind them, and then again, share the areas where more support is needed, but also what you are doing to provide the support. Because if our goal is improvement, we do have to talk about what we're doing to actually make things better. So here's an example. It's not the whole thing, but 5 assessments provide evidence about our content knowledge. Taken together, these assessments provide consistent evidence supporting our claim that candidates understand content and content related to the standards. And so you'll see I've got assessment 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. I, again, am a little paranoid, so I name them both by the assessment number, and then I put the name of the assessment in parentheses afterwards. Oops. And then what we do is again, I clustered them. So I look specifically at content knowledge. I looked at the standard we're addressing, okay, which was standard 2 really is all about content knowledge. So here's the strength based on GPA. So that's data point 1 for me. Here is the strength based on Praxis scores. That was data point 2 for me, right? I also talked about the strength based on their rubrics that they had, which I think is further down. But you'll also see that down here, I know areas where we needed more support, okay? I do think it's important to remind them, even if the number doesn't look great, they might still be within where it's supposed to be. So even if a student got, for example, a 1 or 2, their mean score still met the requirements. It doesn't mean we can't fix it. All right. And so one of the things we did to help students with Praxis is we got it 240 tutoring for all of our students. So now we have the data. We would expect to see our pass rates increase. And so far they have. And so next time we can talk about that as an area for improvement. Okay. I want to show you just some examples in full. Our contact information is here and we'll have time for questions. But again, I thought it might be helpful to actually look at the assessments so that you could see them. If I can figure out how to get out of the main thing. Okay. So you had a question about the Praxis. So here's our Praxis one. And what you'll notice is we've got, again, Praxis 5001. We've identified the cut score for each of those tests because, of course, it's different. Why be consistent? That'd be too easy, which is fine. All right, we've got 7811. Here's that description that I showed you. And then you'll see, so I've got test 5001 and then test 7811 right underneath it. And again, showing those standards alignment. And then for our student data, I'm sorry if scrolling makes anyone nauseous. We have 2 separate tables. So I made a table just for 5011 Here's the student scores. And then 7811, here's the student scores. Okay. And then again, there's the rationale for why I don't include a national pass rate, because mathematically it doesn't make sense. And then again, the fact that students can mix and match totally makes an overall pass rate for a test not work. It works for other courses, right? But it doesn't work for elementary. Okay. I will say, because we've seen some issues, I know other institutions have as well, that some students will take the test and they don't pass. I did disclose that. I think we have to disclose it. So I did say 3 students did not pass all 4 sections, and therefore we did not recommend them for licensure. I'd rather disclose it than anyone think I'm hiding something. Okay. And then again, there's the narrative. And this is a really short data interpretation, right? Some helpful things to know for the SCTS 4.0 rubric. The Department of Ed actually has a crosswalk that aligns it with the SCEE standards. If it is not posted on their site, that might be something that you email Jackie to ask for if you want to use that as an evidence piece. Again, we do an addendum for ours, but we also have that table so that we have some additional support if we need it. I'm going to show you some other ones. Okay. Here is an example of I told you our assessment 3 is chunked up into multiple assignments. So you'll see that this is an integrated lesson portfolio. I've broken it up. So here's part A is the centers. This is my description. Again, it's just super brief, and then it tells what students are expected to get. Here are the standards it's supposed to address. And then I just outline the standard, the rubric line, and then why. And then for the table, the state wants you to include the percent meeting or exceeding expectations. So you'll see I've got the mean score, I put the range in parentheses, and then the percent meeting or exceeding expectations as an additional column. Super brief narrative, connecting it again to the mean and the specific standard. I'm going to go down and show you how the rubrics have got it highlighted too. All right. And so then what you have to do is include your assessment. So here's our assessment tool. Here's the rubric, and we just make sure the standard is linked under each one. This is where I know Jessica talked about having to map out with every program. I made an Excel file where I put the standards across one line, and then I put the assessment on the other so that I could match them up and make sure everything was covered. It's been helpful as we've changed assessments or as standards have changed to make sure we're meeting needs. What questions do you all have? I don't know how to stop sharing my screen.
If anyone wants to share out questions,
Yeah.
there haven't been a lot on the chat as of yet, more logistical. This is so informative. Thank you so much for this. This is really helpful.
No problem. I did put, again, in the document, I've got, does anybody know how to not share my screen?
We do have a question about, the new standard 2.9 with digital literacy.
Yep.
And how do you show that you're meeting that?
Yeah. Okay. So for us, for digital literacy, we have 3 different places we assess it. In our lesson 3 or our assessment 3, which is that lesson portfolio, one of the things students have to do is an integrated centers assignment in social studies methods, and one of the standard or one of the centers has to include student use of technology. And so they have to explain what students are doing with the technology to address the content and those computer science skills. The other place we use it is in our internship summative evaluation addendum. So we do evaluate them much like we evaluate for their knowledge of social studies, knowledge of content, knowledge of students. We do have specific lines for technology. And then the last one is in our math lesson plan. They actually have to provide examples of the ways they would use technology to enrich student learning. But the rules very clearly say that they cannot use the technology as something like a glorified overhead, right? Like a PowerPoint does not suffice. And so we've been very clear, like, what are your students doing with the technology to learn the technology skills while also enriching those other content areas? No problem. What other questions? Did any of you try the link for the cover letter at the bottom? Okay, so like it is in the PowerPoint. Please use it if you would like to. I mean, I don't, it's fine. It's there. How do you get the PowerPoint? I put it up in the chat. I'm going to repost it for you because if you missed it by a minute, I know it may not share it with you. There you go. No problem. And that's all I had. I figured we'd leave 20 minutes for questions. Is anybody like writing their report right now? She's like, yeah.
We're writing 9 right now, but yes,
Yeah.
we're full in elementary. I'm the elementary program chair. And so yes, I'm right in there, and still this has been so helpful. And looking at and making sure the key that the PRC is looking for is, again, that continuous improvement, and also that you have made alignment to all of the standards the best that you can. So what's beautiful about looking at the new standards now, there was very little switch from the ACEI. There's just an addition of 2.1 and 2.9 for the content standard 2. Otherwise, it is literally ACEI standards that you've seen before. So, and really thinking about the trickiest thing for us was for us was really focusing on, we started a couple of years ago, thinking about, hey, how are we going to integrate, especially equity, inclusion, and families, and that homeschool connection with our diverse students and all of that. So, and meeting for elementary, that would be standard 5. That 5.1 and 5.2, it's just called professionalism, but it's more about collaboration piece. I believe it's called, I'm working on so many professionalism, ethical practice. What we did is integrated an actual equity issue project that our students do in their senior block, where they actually they're in their practicum school, they research an equity issue dealing with connecting to diverse families. And they do a whole project research. They implement it. It's action-based research. They develop a plan for action. They work with the school and colleagues and all of that. And then they implement that plan. There's just different ways that you can do that. For the digital literacy, we've done, it's part of multiple things that we do, we do a portfolio unit plan kind of thing. That's an e-portfolio, but also the addendum. And Catherine was talking about adding a content addendum where you include that in your internship, and then throughout the internship, the CT and the university supervisor are observing, particularly the CT, the students doing all the different 2.1 to 2.9. And then you have the CT and the university supervisor support, because the CT is the one that sees them, and evaluate them on, we do a content pedagogy process
Mhm.
and for the 9. And that really helps to support, because multiple, like the physical education, the 2.9, the digital literacy, the health, the arts integration also can be more complex to show. We don't have specific methods courses. For the arts, we also have an arts diversity project that we have the students do in junior block. So there's ways to integrate, but we only have 8 assessments. So we have to get creative. You may be adding on, like Catherine did, where they did the lesson plans. They do it multiple times. For us, we do these unit plans in different subject areas. And so we've done what like they did, where you have to meet that specific for that assessment, we have 2 different unit plans, for example. For
Yeah,
that,
I will say,
for assessment 3, I think it is. So we have,
yep.
we have 3A, 3B that meet, because it's when you're doing a specific content area like social studies, ELA, it's only those 2 specific standards. Then it's going to hit standard 3 really well with instruction and planning. So just really, but the main thing that we're looking at in the PRC is that your students are well prepared, and also the continuous improvement that happens. Tell your story. And so it's not about, well, every student mastered everything and our program is perfect. It's looking at, what we've created this program, we're creating these high quality candidates, but also these are the areas that we've improved on, and that continuous improvement. So that's really, really important.
I think
And something
too,
that we look at.
really, if you can identify trends across your data sets. Now, when you're only submitting 2 data sets, that can be harder, right? But perhaps you find maybe you should include a 3rd one that's just one cycle beforehand, because maybe things were a dumpster fire, right? Before the 2 data sets that you're submitting. And so then you can be like, this is where we were, and look at the growth that we've made as a result, right? And it may still not be perfect. Again, we set our goals with the praxis exam. You saw one of them, I think it was like a 55% first time pass rate. Well, the goal for the next year was 60%. The goal for the year after that was 65. Our goal is to get to 80, but we knew we weren't going to do it in 1 year. Like, we had to be reasonable, and so we set goals that we thought, this is something we can do. There are methods we can use to do it. And it holds us accountable too. So I will say, when you analyze the data, it is better to parse it out by data set 1, data set 2 to, again, show those trends. I think for many of us, we're fortunate in elementary ed because our programs tend to be large enough that we're able to do that. It's hard. My colleagues, at least in science at Coastal, when you have 2 students, right, 1 each semester, it's a little bit harder for them to be like, here's a trend. They can't do it.
Yes, and you can submit that, if you have low enrollment, for example, if you're doing multiple programs and if your elementary ed is a low enrollment, we still look at, you can put an N of 0 if that happens.
Yep.
We are looking at the overall, and it is harder to show trends when you are working with a low N. So that is something to consider, offering more data. If you have a semester that you had a higher N in to share. And also, if you develop a new assessment and you only have 1 cycle of data, for example, we developed a assessment based on the science of reading. It was piloted last semester, and it's, now in full force this semester. So we're offering it as our final assessment as well, this is where we're going, right? We only have one cycle of data to share because it's not, this semester's not complete yet, but at the same time, we're showing that, hey, we're moving towards where we're going with reading instruction, and we've developed assessments based and projects that are based on specifically to the science of reading, for example. So you can do that also. So if you're saying, oh my gosh, we don't have something really strong for collaboration, think about developing something, piloting it and sharing that if you have time to do that. Because we look at that also on the PRC as well. This is really continuous improvement.
Any other questions? And we won't keep you all, so thank you for joining us. And if you do have questions, please feel free to reach out for folks. So Joy's asking about volunteers. Usually Jackie will send an email out, right, Judy, soliciting
Yes, what
volunteering?
happens is that Jackie sends those out to the deans and the chairs, and then they share those with you, and then we take on you'll submit your packet, and then be selected, or it goes up for a vote. So it's a process, but definitely reach out to your dean or your chair if you are the dean or chair. Reach out to Jackie about when those because we're always every cycle. It's usually we take on one new member, public or private, and it alternates each semester. And so you would send in your your CV and a cover letter, and then you would be considered to join the PRC.